I've spent decades analyzing military interventions and their consequences for regional stability, watching how sudden regime changes can reshape geopolitical relationships across entire hemispheres. What I observed during Trump's military operation in Venezuela this morning revealed something profound about how unilateral action can alter international law and diplomatic norms in ways that extend far beyond any single country. I'm talking about the moment when Trump ordered large-scale military strikes against Venezuela and announced the capture of President Nicolás Maduro, creating unprecedented implications for international law, regional security, and global power dynamics. The operation that unfolded in the early hours of January 3rd marked a dramatic escalation in Trump's pressure campaign against the Maduro government, transforming what had been economic sanctions and naval blockades into direct military intervention and regime change. I tracked how Trump's decision to move from indirect pressure to direct military action represented a fundamental shift in American foreign policy approach toward Latin America that creates precedents affecting international relations globally. The timing of this operation, coming just days into Trump's new term, signals an administration prepared to use military force unilaterally to achieve political objectives that previous administrations had pursued through diplomatic and economic means. The strikes that hit military installations in Caracas, including the Fuerte Tiuna complex and La Carlota Air Base, demonstrated significant planning and coordination that required months of preparation and intelligence gathering. Trump's announcement that Maduro and his wife had been captured and flown out of the country creates immediate questions about the legal framework under which American forces conducted what amounts to an arrest operation on foreign soil. The Venezuelan government's response, including Vice President Delcy Rodriguez's demand for proof of life of Maduro, illustrates how regime change operations create power vacuums that can lead to sustained instability rather than immediate resolution. The international legal implications of Trump's operation challenge fundamental principles of sovereignty and non-interference that have governed international relations since the United Nations Charter established these norms after World War II. When major powers conduct military operations to remove foreign leaders without UN authorization or clear self-defense justifications, it affects global perceptions of whether international law constrains powerful countries or merely applies to smaller nations. The regional reactions have been swift and concerning for broader hemispheric stability. Colombia's President Gustavo Petro called for emergency organization of American states meetings, while other Latin American governments expressed alarm about American military intervention. The precedent that Trump's operation establishes for future American military interventions in Latin America creates uncertainty for governments throughout the region about whether their sovereignty will be respected if they conflict with American interests. Mexico's response will be particularly significant given its extensive border with the United States and the immigration cooperation that both countries require for effective border management. Brazil and Argentina, the region's largest economies, face decisions about whether to support, condemn, or remain neutral regarding American military intervention that violates established international law principles. The economic implications for Venezuela are immediate and severe. Global oil markets responded to the operation with price volatility as traders assessed how regime change might affect Venezuelan crude production and export capabilities. Venezuela possesses the world's largest proven oil reserves, and uncertainty about post-Maduro governance affects global energy markets and investment decisions across the oil industry. The humanitarian situation in Venezuela, which had been deteriorating under international sanctions, now faces additional complexity as military intervention creates refugee flows and internal displacement. Neighboring countries that had been managing Venezuelan refugee populations, already numbering in millions, now confront potential new waves of displacement caused by military intervention and political instability. The drug trafficking justifications that Trump cited for the operation create questions about whether counter-narcotics efforts require military intervention and regime change rather than cooperative law enforcement approaches. The $50 million bounty that the United States had placed on Maduro's capture doubled from $25 million last summer, represented the kind of financial incentive typically reserved for international terrorists rather than sovereign leaders. International counter-narcotics cooperation typically depends on sustained partnership between law enforcement agencies rather than military operations that eliminate the governments those agencies serve. The Cartel de los Soles allegations that linked Maduro to drug trafficking had been building the legal justification for capture operations, but using military force to execute arrest warrants against foreign leaders creates unprecedented legal questions. The intelligence sharing arrangements that supported regional drug interdiction efforts face disruption when military intervention replaces the governments that participated in those cooperative frameworks. The counter-narcotics boats that Trump's forces had been striking for months in the Caribbean represented a gradual escalation that culminated in direct military intervention against Venezuelan territory and government facilities. Colombian drug trafficking organizations that had been operating through Venezuelan territory now face uncertainty about new governance arrangements that could either enhance or complicate their operations depending on post-intervention stability. The maritime interdiction operations that had been destroying drug trafficking vessels created the operational precedent and intelligence networks that enabled the larger military intervention that captured Maduro. European allies who had been coordinating sanctions against the Maduro government now confront American military action that exceeds what they had endorsed through diplomatic channels. NATO partners who support democratic transitions in Venezuela through peaceful means face decisions about whether to endorse or distance themselves from American military intervention. The United Nations Security Council faces demands for emergency sessions to address American military action, but previous patterns suggest procedural obstacles will prevent meaningful institutional response. China's reaction will affect broader U.S.-China relations as Beijing assesses American willingness to use military force to achieve political objectives despite international law constraints. Russia's response, given its previous military and economic support for the Maduro government, affects broader U.S.-Russia tensions and nuclear deterrence calculations. The domestic American political implications include constitutional questions about congressional authorization for military operations that amount to war against a country that posed no direct threat to American territory. Trump's decision to proceed without clear congressional approval continues patterns of executive branch expansion that affect the constitutional balance of powers regarding war authorization. The military personnel who conducted the operation face potential legal exposure if future investigations determine that their actions violated international law or exceeded constitutional authority. The operational planning that enabled simultaneous strikes on multiple Venezuelan military installations while conducting a capture mission required extensive intelligence preparation and coordination between different military branches. The intelligence agencies that supported the operation, including the CIA drone strike last month, now operate under precedents that may affect their future activities in international cooperation. The extraction operation that removed Maduro and his wife from Venezuelan territory represents a significant intelligence and military achievement, but creates questions about the legal authority for such operations against sovereign leaders. The coordination between law enforcement and military agencies that Trump referenced in his announcement suggests a blending of domestic and international authorities that may affect future operations. The legal framework under which Maduro will be prosecuted creates questions about American courts' jurisdiction over foreign leaders and the precedents this establishes for future cases. The press conference that Trump scheduled for 11 a.m. at Mar-a-Lago will provide additional details about the operation, but early statements suggest this represents a carefully planned military and intelligence operation rather than opportunistic action. International courts and legal institutions may respond to American military intervention with proceedings that challenge American actions and create ongoing diplomatic complications. The 2020 narco-terrorism indictment that American prosecutors had filed against Maduro provided the legal framework for capture operations, But executing those warrants through military intervention rather than cooperative law enforcement creates new precedents. The coordination with U.S. law enforcement that Trump referenced suggests that the operation was structured as law enforcement action rather than purely military intervention, but the distinction may not affect international legal assessments. The Venezuelan opposition faces complex decisions about whether to support American military intervention that achieved their political objectives through means they had not publicly endorsed. Opposition leader Maria Corina Machado's organization stated they had no comment on the operation, illustrating the difficulty of endorsing foreign military intervention even when it serves domestic political objectives. The reconstruction challenges that Venezuela will face require sustained international cooperation, but military intervention may complicate the legitimacy of whatever government emerges from American-sponsored transition. The regional implications extend beyond Venezuela to affect American relationships with every Latin American government as they assess whether cooperation with the United States protects them from or exposes them to similar interventions. The broader implications for international law affect global governance systems that depend on major powers' respective